You're listening to episode 220 of the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
What are you scared of? I think we all have some fears. I know I have mine. Josh, Marianne, I'm holding a list of the top 10 fears. This is based on a research survey of 2,000 Americans done in 2018. There are the top 10 things that Americans are afraid of. I want to see if you can guess which ones are on the list.
Arachnophobia.
Ooh, it is not. The fear of spiders is not on this list.
Wow.
I think it should be, though. I do.
I think it should be too.
Yeah.
What about the fear of drowning?
Boy, it's not on here either.
The fear of failing?
The fear of failing is not on here. Boy, we probably need to get a new survey, don't we?
Look, I've got one right here. I know that is there. It's like the Family Feud. Show me the fear of heights.
Heights is number 2.
Oh, my
Heights
goodness.
is number 2. Now, interestingly enough, there's one close to the arachnophobia or the fear of spiders that's on here. What do you think it is?
Fear of snakes.
Snakes is number 1. And by the way, that is one of mine.
What about claustrophobia?
Claustrophobia is on here. That is number 4. 21% of Americans are fearful of confined spaces.
Yes.
What about the fear of flying?
Oh.
The fear of flying is number 9. 14% of Americans are fearful of flying.
What about the fear of falling?
Ooh, how about, maybe that's wrapped in with heights. How about that?
Okay, I'll take it.
Which is number 2.
Heights. Okay.
There's a couple on here that surprised me that I would never come up with. One I thought we would, because I've always heard that, the fear of dying in some previous surveys usually ranks number 2, and fear of public speaking is number 1. So people would rather die than to publicly speak before an audience of thousands. Public speaking is on here, but there's a couple on here that I don't think we would ever get to. Let me just share this list with you, the items we didn't get to.
All right.
Clowns, number 6, 18% of the people surveyed. I mean, I hear that all the time and always chuckle, but I guess this is a real thing, and probably our listeners are going, you better believe it's a real thing. The fear of needles, shots. Getting shots. That actually ranked above clowns, 21%. The number 3 answer surprised me to no end. Dentists.
That's my husband's.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And then the fear of dark is number 8. And get this, number 10, fear of birds.
They are fierce.
Hey,
They can be. I was crossing the street at a conference I was at, and there was a gnome. People had told me about it. They said, be careful when you cross this street. This bird will dive bomb and get you. Well, I knew where it was, but I thought I was far enough away. And this bird came out, dive bomb, and hit me in the head.
I remember that conference, Ron.
You were there. I know. Did he get you?
I was guilty of sitting across confession time. This is my confession. I sat across the street and may have chuckled at a time or two watching that bird go. It might have gotten Marianne, and that's where she got those cool earrings she's wearing.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
You can't see
She's
this
got
girl.
feathers hanging from her
I
ears.
slayed the bird, and I'm now wearing the bird.
I'm telling you, she has the most fierce. You can't see them, but they are fierce feathered earrings. It looks like a wing hanging from each ear. It's awesome.
It does. It does.
You're a bold girl. You are not
Okay.
afraid of big earrings.
So we shared the top 10 list of what Americans are fearful of. What's your fears there? Marianne, what's your one or two fears you're willing to share?
I am very claustrophobic, and last year I faced numerous health challenges, and I had to have lots of MRIs and lots of scans. And now, when you go to an MRI, they try to help you out and give you these glasses that have mirrors that help you believe that you're looking out instead of being enclosed. Like, it's your depth perception. So it makes you think you've got an open space, but it's just glasses. Those don't work, people. Okay.
They don't sound like they would work.
And I had to have a cardiac MRI, which is one where you have to be strapped down to things. And then inside this thing that's pretty much like a coffin, I kept thinking in the back of my head, it's just like a tanning bed. It's just like a tanning bed. It's just like a tanning bed.
No.
Oh my
But
goodness.
I'm claustrophobic, and I also have a huge fear of my children drowning.
Mm.
There's lots of reasons why. My son actually almost drowned in the baptistry
Wow.
when he was 4, and he didn't see the water and he ran right into it. And my husband had to go all the way from down below all the way up fully clothed to get him out.
Oh, man.
And it was a close one. I mean, it was serious. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Babe, I almost lost him." So I fear my kids drowning. Those are my two biggest ones.
Yeah. Wow.
What about you guys?
Well, I'm listening to the top 10 list. And I'm like, Ron, people that are going to think you're the baddest man ever because you're not afraid of flying or public speaking or any of that stuff. You have to do all of those things. Like, you're facing everybody's fear.
Oh, man. You're going to laugh, Josh, but, in the military, I jumped out of planes, but I am actually scared of heights. I do not like short heights. You take me to a 2 or 3 story mall and I have to go to the banister and lean over. I'm going to have a death grip on the banister, but before I lean over, I'm going to shake it to make sure it's sturdy. Where my kids just walk right over and peek their head over like, "Hey, no big deal, Dad." I'm like, "Hey, guys, come on." I don't like, and I guess I'm fearful that if I fall from short heights, I might actually live. Where if you fall with a parachute accident, you're not going to die from the parachute not opening. You're going to die from that sudden stop at the bottom, but you're going to die. And that's the good news there.
Well, that good news, like me, I'm afraid of heights myself. Well, only if I can do something to mess it up. Like, if there is something that I can somehow pull a klutz move and fall or slip, like like hiking or something up a big cliff or something, I'm not about that. Now, you put me on a roller coaster where I'm strapped in, I trust some engineers, and I'll go as high as the thing will take me. But if there's any room for my error, I want no part of it. I'm also claustrophobic, like Marianne over here. Like, my family makes fun of me, but I have to, like, we go to school plays or whatever, I have to sit on the end seat. Like, I can't sit in the middle of all these people, like at concerts and stuff. I go for the edge seats because it does something to me, freaks me out a little bit.
Well, I will tell you, this is confession time. I thought the idea of being fearful of claustrophobia, again, kind of like clowns. Well, I don't see how people can be fearful of that. And when I was at the first D6 Korea, the conference, the hosts over there were really gracious, and they asked me the day after the conference when we had some downtime. They said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "I know this sounds like the American answer, but I'd really love to go to the DMZ." And so they took me up to the DMZ there in north of Seoul. It's a good ways out of town, but it's very drivable. It's just short distance drive, but a ways to walk. And we got up there to the DMZ, and one of the options was to go down into a tunnel. They had discovered that North Korea had been digging tunnels large enough to carry battalions of troops in order to invade South Korea, and this was after the peace agreement had been reached. And so they were secretly digging these tunnels that went down, we're talking 200 or 300 meters deep, and you have to walk down in these little tight spaces, and they go underground. And so they said, you want to go down in there? And I thought, how cool. And we got on this ramp, and you're walking at like this 12-degree, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a steep ramp, and you're walking down. And this thing is like as wide as a mall corridor. But they warned us when we got to the bottom, to the actual tunnel, that these tunnels were dug by people whose height is a lot shorter average height than Americans. And when I got down to this tunnel, again, 200 to 300 meters below the surface, it's not wide enough for two people to fit together. You have to turn sideways in order to pass at certain places with people coming out, and we were going in. And I had to walk hunched over. I could not stand up fully inside this tunnel. And we walked for 400 meters to the end of it. So I'd already gone down 200 to 300. I walked 400. I almost lost it down in that tunnel. I'm like, there's no safety protocols. If something happened to me, I'm dying in here. They can't get me out that quick. And I really began to have some mild anxiety issues. And when I came back to the States, I actually had some nightmares about being in weird elevators and small spaces. And I've never experienced anything like that before, but that fear was real. And I don't make fun of anybody over, I've never had before, but mentally I'm like, really, claustrophobia? I'm like, now I'm not sure, you know?
I have anxiety listening to you tell me that story. Like my palms are a little sweaty right now.
Oh man, I'm sweating thinking about reliving it. I really am. That got me. It really, it took me several weeks to get past that, just in my subconscious area. But fear is real. And those are just the things that affect our physical well-being. We have fears, you talked, Marianne, about fear of your kids drowning. How are we also fearful? Our guest is going to talk about our fear as it relates to parenting. What's our biggest fears as parents at this point?
I want my children to know and walk with Jesus at the end of the day. That's what I want. Because here's the deal. It says that when we know Jesus, we experience shalom, shalom, perfect peace. That scripture is so powerful to me. And I want them to experience perfect peace in the midst of chaos. We live in a new world since COVID. And no, I don't want my kids to suffer. Honestly, as a mom, I don't want them to suffer. I don't want them to struggle. So there's a piece of me that's fearful there. But at the end of the day, I want them to know and depend and love Jesus. And I don't always get it right. We've already covered, that we have freedom in parenting and we don't need to have shame. But, I want to point them to Jesus, to want to be desperate for him. And so I think sometimes my fear can drive me in that way sometimes.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I remember, as you grow up as a child and even as a teenager, and I was a little wayward. I was a prodigal son for sure. But in the back of my mind, I didn't have parents. My parents died when I was younger, but I had parental figures. My grandparents were like my parental figures. But I knew that no matter what I did or what kind of trouble I may have gotten into, I could always go to them and they were going to help fix whatever it was. And I remember driving home from the hospital going, oh my goodness gracious, I am that person now for this child. And now my children, as they get older and I get older, we're talking about being grandparents one day and we're dreaming, about our golden years. And I'm like, is this really where I'm at in life right now? But it's a reality that I'm learning to embrace. But at the same time, it's a little fearful, as you're going like, wow, am I not just going to be a good parent, but what kind of grandparent am I going to be,
Like you guys, some of my fears were derived from two things. Number one, my wife and I used to always say to our kids, we want you to make wise spiritual decisions. Well, that would be our goal. We're always making decisions, but they need to have that biblical influence in it. And I've seen, and we've all seen, that one small wrong decision can change a permanent trajectory of their lives, whether it's in a car accident, whether or not it's on a date time, whether or not it's playing, ruckus at a pool party, there's just the turn of events can literally flip so quick. And so I always worried about a decision. As much as we prepared them, we all make silly mistakes. And when their brains aren't fully formed as, young teenagers, how do we expect them to always make those right decisions? And then the flip side of that is, what if they are making the right decisions, but somebody around them makes the wrong decision and they're not in my care, and they just happen to be the byproduct or the consequences of somebody else's stupid mistakes?
Mm-hmm.
Those were my biggest fears as parenting, is, when they're not there. And part of me wants to put them in the bubble, here's the bubble, crawl in, I'm going to protect you, you can go nowhere, and that's not the answer. We really do have to trust them out and about, that they can be where they are. And wow, it's a challenging area for us today when we think about these areas. Our guest today is going to talk through how do we help with the fear-based parenting, how do we help with nurturing this in the right way. And we're going to look at this. He's not only authored many books, but we got him to participate in one of our books that happens to be one of Marianne's favorite books, isn't it?
Yes. Recalibrate is one of my favorite books. And I just want to stop and say, ministry leaders, this is a treasure trove of leadership resources to help you as you lead in ministry. And the great thing about it is you don't have to necessarily read it like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. You can actually open it up and go, you know what, this is where I am right now in my ministry. This is what I need to tackle right now, and go to that chapter. It's so great. It's a treasure trove of wisdom. It is really transforming how I lead. And so I would highly recommend to jump on randallhouse.com, go to our store, or go to amazon.com and grab Recalibrate. You will not regret it. You will not regret it. It is so valuable. So valuable.
As somebody who falls asleep a lot of times at night reading, what I love about this book is because it's from some of my favorite authors. There's literally basically 15 books in one. A lot of these guys cover the synopsis or the cliff notes of their, book that they have in one chapter. And for me, it just is very, very handy to be able to lean on that. And one of the things I love about Dr. Jimmy Myers is the way he goes about empowering parents, as he talks about fearless parenting, because even the concept of that, you're thinking, is that even a real thing, fearless parenting? But, he really talks about, how fear and it can sometimes at times be the lack of preparation, but a lot of times fear is our motivation as parents, and that really doesn't need to be the place we parent from. And he does a great job of unpacking that in this podcast, and I'm looking really forward to listening in, and I hope you guys will be able to glean some wisdom as we have from Dr. Jimmy Myers with the podcast.
Today, I am talking to Dr. Jimmy Myers. Dr. Myers is the co-owner and CEO of the Timothy Center, a multi-campus Christian counseling facility in Austin, Texas. He founded the Timothy Center after serving 20 years as a youth minister in the local church. His latest book, co-authored with George Barna, is entitled Fearless Parenting: How to Raise Faithful Kids in a Secular Culture. He also co-hosts the Paradox podcast with his son, Josh. Dr. Myers, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to talk about your podcast real quick because it took me a couple minutes to actually figure out what you were saying there.
Yeah.
Because the listeners heard me say paradox, and they're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. That's a word, but it's not spelled the normal way.
No, it's not.
Can you explain what this is? Because it's really cool.
Yes. John Thomas, Dr. John Thomas at Liberty University he chaired my dissertation committee. And then several years later, he chaired my son's dissertation committee.
Wow.
And I was up when Josh defended his dissertation, and so we were sitting in the room, and when John walked in, he went, oh, look at that, a paradox. And so I'm sure that was not necessarily original with John, but that's where it came from.
That's very cool. And so if you're looking for it, paradox is spelled like pair, like
P-A-I-R-A-D-O-C-S, paradox.
Probably the coolest podcast name I have heard. My
Absolutely.
apologies to the D6 people along here with me, but you guys take the cake for that one. So you served as a youth minister for 20 years.
Yeah.
How tired are you?
Very. It was when I was having PTSD flashbacks from junior high retreats. That's when I knew I had to hang it up.
How many lock-ins did you do in that time? Too many?
Way too many.
Yeah.
Running and sitting on balloons was getting really old.
Yeah, so you can still feel that pain years down
Yes.
the road, the mental and physical pain. Well, we're talking today about fearless parenting. There was something that just jumped out to me right away when I was reading your book. You said that 61% of theologically conservative parents admit to making parenting decisions based on fear. Why is fear-based parenting so prevalent today?
Well, it's been prevalent for 100 plus years. And that 61% were just the honest ones. It would be a lot more than 61%. But I mean, back in the 1920s, it would be flappers. Lord knows you don't want your daughters showing their ankles or listening to jazz. What I'm trying to think. Elvis, the advent of rock and roll, the Beatles in the 60s and 70s, and then your rap music, it's all going to Hades in a handbasket once rap was unleashed on the world. So there's always been some. Oh, I forgot. I started youth ministry. I did youth ministry basically through the 80s and 90s. And backward masking is my favorite parental fear of all time. Are you familiar with what it is?
I am.
Because if your listeners aren't, I beg them to Google it just so they'll get a good laugh. But there's always, Christian parents have always been petrified of culture. And it's not a new phenomenon, but we're finally, I think, waking up to the fact that that is our motivator for what we do. Mm-hmm. We want to segregate our kids because we're afraid. We want to protect our kids because we're afraid of this godless culture. And this, by the way, has been tried before in the monastic age when we all believers in Scripture was huddled behind big, thick stone walls in monasteries, and that's why it was called the Dark Ages. This is a philosophy that doesn't work, hasn't worked, and when we see the hemorrhaging of young people out of the church today, we see that this philosophy just simply doesn't work.
Yeah, and you said not only does it not work, but it's actually a sign of disobedience to God. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, fear is the opposite of faith. Over 300 times in Scripture we're implored, do not fear. Be not afraid. Don't fear. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't fear. Don't be fear. Don't be afraid. Over and over. And still, fear is the central motivating factor in our parenting choices. And it shows a remarkable lack of belief in what we say we believe.
Yeah. Now, we can have a quick little therapy session right here.
How do you feel?
We're getting there. Fearful, tired, scared. So many Christian parents are scared of what's happening in our world. I have a son who's not even one yet, and I'm already looking around me, and I'm scared of what could happen, what the culture is going to try to do to him, and how they're going to try to influence him. And it seems like today, well, it doesn't seem like it's happening. Parents who stand for biblical truth and try to teach biblical truth in their kids are often labeled as being hateful, judgmental, bigots. How can we be fearless parents in a world that's trying to teach our children to rebel against us and rebel against those biblical values?
Well, fear, whether it's we were talking baseball before we signed on, fear is simply evidence of a lack of preparation. I get nervous before I speak or whatever because I haven't prepared very well. If I've prepared really well, I'm not really afraid. Someone will go, gosh, when you're speaking and there's thousands of people, aren't you? No, I get excited about getting out there and da-da-da because I'm prepared. Our parents are not preparing these children. We segregate, we protect, and then we just pray it all goes right. As opposed to changing this philosophy from being fear-based to being preparation-based. From their earliest childhood, it's like, okay, as soon as they're born, we're on the clock. And I've got just so many years now to prepare them to enter culture. Because there is no not having them enter culture. I don't care if you homeschool them, they go to a little Christian college. It doesn't matter. At some point, they are thrown headfirst into culture. We can either protect them from that experience for as long as possible and pray for the best, or we can use those years that they're in our house to prepare them to challenge culture and succeed.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the difference between Christian kids and non-Christian kids, or if there even is a difference. So we'll be right back after this.
Scripture and modern-day research attests to this truth. When one generation commits to and engages in the discipleship of another generation, people of all ages know Jesus and become more like him. This commitment requires us to say goodbye to the myopic focus on the next generation and instead broaden our view to every generation. Every generation. Moms, dads, grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles, kindergartners and middle school students, college freshmen and newlyweds, each one awakened to Jesus Christ and living out a vibrant faith with one another. We invite you to adopt this focus at the D6 Conference, a family ministry event built on the Deuteronomy 6 philosophy of generational discipleship. You will experience 3 days of strategy, resources, and action steps to help move your church forward together. Discover what's in store at d6conference.com.
We are right back with Dr. Jimmy Myers, and we are talking about fearless parenting right now. Now, in your book, you mentioned that the worldviews and daily actions of Christian kids are really not all that different from their non-believing counterparts. And one of the only differences is use the phrase spiritual cosmetics. Can you explain what you mean by spiritual cosmetics?
On virtually any matrix you want to judge this, Christian kids are not making moral choices at really much of a different rate than non-Christian kids, and it doesn't matter what that is. Whether it is lying, whether it's justifying cheating on a test, whether it's looking at pornography. When you look, I was sharing with a group this morning, probably the latest and largest research study done in 2018 of all 20-year-olds to 29-year-olds, 82% of those 20-somethings are looking at hardcore pornography every week. Wow. Not that they've seen it, not that every week. They're almost at addictive levels, 82% of all 20-something-year-olds.
My goodness.
And that is true of Christians as well as non-Christians. Christian parents today are really sort of failing at this task of passing on our faith to our kids. What they were showing last night, those stats of between Amish children who grow up to remain committed Amish or Jewish children that grow up to remain Jewish is 95-something%. But Christians, it's as low as 11%, as high as 38 or 9%. That as adults continue in their Christian faith. So what Christian parents are doing right now is failing. And if we keep doing the same thing the same way, expecting a different result, we're crazy.
So as parents, what can we do to cultivate that difference in our kids?
Well, preparation begins from a very young age. Yes, it's important because the church has done a really good job of teaching our kids what to believe. Mm-hmm. We are all square that Zacchaeus was a wee little man. We've got that down pat. But why we believe what we say we believe, we have failed miserably in trying to explain to our children why they believe it, so they have a firm foundation for when they leave our homes. So earlier on in life, yes, we need to be teaching them, of course, scriptural truth and what belief is and how that is, but there comes a time, and really it comes pretty early in life, that we need to take that faith and start focusing on why they believe it, getting into apologetics, to be able to meet some of the challenges that are these intellectual challenges that are hitting them right in the kisser when they walk out the door. And one study we mentioned just this morning in the breakout group, and gosh, now I forget the author, but it was the number one reason that young adults gave for leaving the faith, basically, was that their doubts and questions were never addressed or answered. That was the number one reason that they gave. So at some point, we've got to integrate in apologetics, why we believe. And even though people don't like it, they think it's boring, they think it's like math class or history class in the 8th grade, it doesn't matter what you think about it. It's essential that churches start to establish a womb-to-tomb edition of apologetics in our philosophy of discipleship, and in our homes, that every home has a library. Parents don't have to know the answers to all of this. If God's all loving and all powerful, how can there be evil and suffering in the world? They don't have to go back and get a degree. They've just got to have 4 or 5 books on their shelf, because we talked this morning about our goal in the church is to equip parents not to have a blank stare. When the kid comes in and asks, which creation story am I do we believe, Mommy and Daddy? And we just stare at them blankly. Our goal is to make sure that our parents don't stare blankly at their kids, because all these hard questions that are being asked on the outside of the church, and it's crickets on the inside. Nobody's talking about it, teaching about it, preaching about it, and that's all they're talking about outside the church. So if there's deafening silence in the church, that tells a kid there are no answers. This is a house of cards, and I'll go pursue something else, thank you. So we've got to begin preparing these kids at an early age to not only know what they believe, but why they believe it.
You mentioned that blank stare that we don't want from parents. I've heard you say that every day you hear from parents who feel unprepared to deal with their children's issues. What final word of encouragement would you offer to parents who want to move from that fearful parenting to fearless parenting?
Again, you lose your fear when you're prepared. You lose your fear of what culture is going to do to your children when your child is prepared. We mentioned the podcast with my son Josh, who's the co-owner of the Timothy Center with me now. He's in his upper 30s. But I used to watch with excitement him hanging with non-Christian kids that would get kicked out of his school, for marijuana possession or whatever. So it wasn't oh my gosh, stay away from them, you're forbidden to see them. It was almost like it was, Josh, sick 'em, go. I did not have one doubt of what his motivations were, what he was there for. And so that I didn't have any fear of who he was hanging with, because I knew how prepared he was as a child. So we lose our faith when we prepare ourselves to engage with the conflict that is coming.
Well, these are timeless principles in a culture that is always changing.
Yes,
so Dr.
Lord.
Myers, thank you so much
Appreciate
for joining
it.
us today. Thank you for sharing this with us. As a parent, I just want to say thank you personally for helping me kind of know the direction I'm supposed to go in, so I don't have to live in fear every day of
There
my
you
life.
go.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Well, I think you can see why we've been talking through fear in this episode. And fear, I loved his quote, fear is the opposite of faith. And Josh, you hit this kind of with the intro. I loved his illustrations where he said we can overcome fear with greater preparation. He does not get nervous going in front of large crowds because he's prepared. And so we shouldn't get nervous when our kids have to go out on their own, because we prepared them. And we can trust God with them because we were intentional. And by the way, how do you prepare them? I would say be intentional with the resources that we have been providing you all these years. D6 Family is a clearinghouse of preparation for you, whether it's the podcast or D6 Plus, whether or not it's our curriculum that you implement every single week at home and at church, or it's picking up one of these books and reading it. It doesn't really matter. You can't do it all, but figure out which parts of these that fits your ministry and do it so that you don't look back and say, hey, I wish I'd have done something different here.
One of the things that I really we try to drive home to parents that we speak about all the time, because you guys have seen this as well, but so many parents want to attempt to prepare the path for their children, and they go out front and want to clean away all the weeds and every obstacle, and like, okay, baby, now you can come ahead. Mama's cleared off the path and it's safe to come out now. But the truth is our job as parents is not to prepare the path for our children, but prepare our children for the path.
Yes.
Because eventually they will leave the nest and be on their own, and we want to empower them. That's one of the things that I just loved about, he really reminded us that we're not just raising kids, but we are preparing adults. And one of the ways, like you said, to do that is with the D6 every day. I'm so excited about this curriculum because it is taking things beyond just Sunday and really putting the tools and resources in parents' hands to use those other 167 hours of the week, because the truth is they do have more influence over them than anyone in the church as far as church leadership goes. And we want to empower parents. And so I just want to thank you, Ron, and your team for developing and going this extra mile and implementing this new D6 every day. You know, I'm really, really excited about this. And I'm sure Marianne can probably dig in a little bit. And Marianne, can you kind of give me a little scoop on what we're going to see with this?
I just want to say that to ministry leaders out here, I'm super passionate about this. It's not an issue of having resources. Our job as ministry leaders is to be resource brokers and to make sure we're putting the right resources in our families' hands. And so, yes, I'm super passionate about D6 every day. This is a game changer. And what a timely message from Jimmy Myers right now, post-COVID, church reopening, figuring out church and home, D6 every day. This all goes together. And I love how God does that when he pieces together and just things happen right on time. And one of the things that I think sets D6 every day apart and aside from other curriculums is that not only does it value rich doctrine and teaching principles, but it equips your families for the at-home piece. That is vital, making sure that what's being taught at the church building 2 times a week is being reiterated in the home daily. 2 words that stood out to me from this podcast was be intentional and be consistent. And I think D6 every day can help you do that. Be intentional and be consistent. That is how we equip our children. You know, we can, as parents, we can either live in the reactive parenting world or the proactive parenting world. And I think that something that's going to be super important and vitally important for us these days, okay, future, post-COVID, is that we are intentional and consistent and we're proactive. We're proactive and we're giving space for our children and our students to ask why and how, and pouring apologetics into our children at a young age, because listen, they're going to navigate a world that's unfamiliar to all of us. So what a better way to equip them?
Marianne, you're so right. You know, the D6 every day doesn't just teach knowledge. Knowledge is good. It's part of Bible engagement, but knowledge alone is simply trivia. When we teach the why, then we're teaching our kids how to be discerning. And the everyday principle of D6 gives our parents the opportunity not to be fearful what they don't know, because when they implement this every day, they'll have regular conversations and they won't be fearful of the unknown. They'll be preparing for what they do know. And it's a huge difference in the posture of the parent when they are intentional.
Can I just read this quote? It just goes along with what you're saying, and it's in Recalibrate under Dr. Jimmy Myers' chapter, and it says, prepare your children to live a life independently dependent on God as their sole source and strength. That is a great mission statement for families.
Would you repeat that one more time, please?
Yes, I love it.
People in the back, as they would say.
Yes. Prepare your children and your teenagers, because you still have time, parents. If they're in your home, you still have time. Prepare them to live a life independently dependent on God as their sole source and strength. That is a way of living in the home. And that's powerful. A world changer is going to live in the world, but not live like the world. That's what we're doing every day as parents. We're helping them learn how to live in it, but not like it.
Yes. Very true. Very true. Thank you all for listening. We are raising tiny humans, and we want them to be purposeful. We want them to be resilient, and we certainly want to prepare them for the path, as Josh admonished, rather than prepare the path itself. Next week, we're going to have Tammy Daughtry with us. Tammy Daughtry is a leading expert on co-parenting. If that's a new term for you, stay tuned for what that's going to be. But The one thing that we recognize in D6 Family Ministries, not every family has the luxury of not experiencing divorce or brokenness or difficulties. We have nearly half of our families that have brokenness in the marriages, and she helps you minister probably more effectively in that brokenness. And with the kids who are having to navigate that path without opting in, they are just forced in. And Tammy's an expert in this topic. So next week we'll be leading you through that with her help. And until then, we're praying for you that your week will be rich, it will be intentional, and that you will be reviewing these resources, passing them along to the parents who are suffering from fears of not being that right parent. Till next week, we're praying for you. Take care.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.